Okay, on this batch, I'm cutting them all into quarters, taking out the little bit of cores and weighing everything because the apples I had left were 10 pounds, 2.3 ounces. So I can get a good weight on them and find out how much I lose from removing the cores. So these are going to go on cookie sheets for pre-freezing, and I'll weigh all of the waste pieces and I'll weigh the apples, make sure that I don't lose anything. So I'll see you when we get these onto cookie sheets.
With a lot of these longer videos, it's more about following the process and less about actual how to freeze dry. It shows the how to freeze dry, but it's really more about what I'm thinking about, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, while I'm doing it. So they become kind of long and maybe even a little boring, and that's why there's the double speed playing or the skip forward 10 seconds at a time. So that's what these videos are for. You can kind of follow along, let it play in the background. Maybe there'll be something interesting or that you want to know about. Thanks for watching and thanks for following along.
About 4 pounds, 10 ounces of apples. That's going to go into the freezer for pre-freezing, and I'll do the other batch the same way, and those will be waiting for another batch. Next, we're going to get started on batch 598. It's another batch of apples, and I had planned to do this batch of apples in our freeze dryer, in part because I wanted to track how much waste there was in the apples from the U-pick place to final freeze dry. So this particular batch of apples was almost exactly 10 pounds before we started processing it. It was 10 pounds, 2.3 ounces. So a part of one apple over 10 pounds. After we removed the cores, it was 9 pounds, 2 ounces. So it lost just a little more than 10%. Now, we'll get them freeze dried. What I'm going to do this time, since my sister has a new freeze dryer and it's a new model, 2022 model in comparison to my 2017 model, we're going to take the apples and split them as evenly as we can into 2 sets and do 1 set in mine and 1 set in hers. So we'll see how that goes and see the differences, the time and things.
Want to see how they compare overall.
We'll get the defrost fan out of the door, and the defrost fan has been sitting in the door and running since the last batch. And since I was getting prepared for doing this apple batch and having my sisters run at the same time, which was foolish because I didn't need to have them run at the same time, I just need to record the data and then compare them, so they didn't have to run at the same time. But I left mine vacant for an extra day. And I left the fan running the entire time to make sure that everything just keeps getting drier inside. I do not want any chance for moisture to build up and have any kind of mold or mildew. So when I'm not running the machine, the door's open. If I'm not running it for an extended period of time, I leave the fan running for at least 2 or 3 days, and then I still leave it open after that. I want to make sure that every nook and cranny is dry in there. Every joint between the rack and the uprights, every piece anywhere has the best chance it can to dry. Now, we'll get this started. I'm going to start with Customize, and then Start Custom. And of course, let's get this closed up. And close the drain valve and continue. So I'm going to make sure that there's a ring all the way around there before I start. Make sure that I'm not pulling in any warm air. Okay, I've got a complete ring around there. Now I don't have to worry about that part. Now let's go get the apples separated and get half of them on trays for this machine. Well, to separate the apples, I have 2 cookie sheets full of apples. What I'm going to do is just weigh them. Got it zeroed out with a bag on it, and I've got 2 bags. One of them is going to be for my machine, one of them for my sister's. Using some of the corrugated plastic sheets to keep the trays of apples from getting too warm. These are the apples I processed a week or 2 ago. They've just been sitting in the freezer waiting. I would have put them in Ziplocs a while ago, but I thought that I was going to do them any second now. Well, any second now turned out to be a week or two. My thought is that since I've got miscellaneous apples and they might not be the same weight on each set, I'll just take hands full from each one of them until I get about halfway. Okay, this has 4 pounds 9 ounces, which is 2,070 grams. Let's see how the other part is. That should be half of it. We're really close, so we'll start with that and then check it. So I'm going to have to take a little bit from the other one because there was too much ice. That's a decent amount of ice on there. So I need to transfer a little bit of this into there, and we'll end up with about 2,000 grams on each. So I need to bring that down. I don't think I can get a lot closer. Okay, 2,000 grams each. Now I'll go ahead and put these in the freezer for a minute till I get the trays ready. And of course I'll bring the other one to my sister's. After being in the freezer for that period of time, they've already lost a bit more water, because now that was 8.8 pounds of apple and it was 9 pounds 2 ounces. So it's lost maybe 4 ounces already just in there. And most of that was the water probably that had been on the apples when I rinsed them. So that's not really apple anyway. So the 8.8 pounds is probably a better measurement of how much apple I had after coring and slicing. So we still have this many apples from that previous set. So we'll find out what this weighs. I've got 2 bags, so if I tear this out with 2 bags in it, then I could just stack these both in there and see how much we have. Okay, we have 3,200 grams. So we'll do 2 sets of 1,600 grams. Here's 1,601, close enough to 1,600. And then this one should be really close to 1,600 also. Almost right at 1,600. I'll put these back in the freezer, get one of them on the trays here, and take one of them to my sister. Yeah, we'll get some parchment cut, and I'll cut some extra ones for my sister. And I've been meaning to change this to go the other direction and just hang the roll over here, and then I could leave the metal edge right here, pull across to a line, and then tear it off. And then I wouldn't have to reposition this every time. I think I could do something simpler on the edge. Costco had the rolls of parchment on sale again, so we got a bunch of rolls. Because even when these aren't on sale, it's only about 3 cents a sheet. When they're on sale, it's close to 2 cents a sheet for these. And I've mentioned before, when we're doing the same food in multiple consecutive batches, that's probably redundant, often use the same paper if it doesn't make it gooey or anything. So some of the fruits are too sticky and they would be a problem, but a lot of foods, no problem. I'll keep 4 of these out for my trays and bring the rest of them to my sister's. The freeze dryer has been pre-cooling for 50 minutes, so it's getting close to an hour. It says that the tray temperature is 12 degrees and the barrel temperature, the thermometer that's underneath, says -30. It's very safe to get them in there. In fact, it would have been okay a little while ago. I'll get all 4 trays loaded and then we'll weigh them. Parchment papers are not required. Just another one of those things I like to do. So I'm just going to pour these out, get them kind of even, and then we'll weigh them afterwards. So this was 2,000 grams of apple slices. So a nice 4.4 pounds of apples. And I'm not going to worry about them being perfectly even. That's it on those 2. And again, when we weigh them, we might even them out a little bit. And then this was 1,600 grams of the Granny Smith apples. We'll get those weighed, and then we'll tuck thermometers in there. just to give me some information about the temperature of the fruit. And 1519. With that, we'll go over and get those into the freeze dryer. And then later we can go to my sister's freeze dryer and get her stuff in. It's been pre-cooling for about an hour now total, including the time it took us to load the trays. The shelf temperature is in the low single digits. Underneath it's about 35 below zero. The thermometers in the food are showing between 0 and 5 degrees. So everything stayed nice and cold as was getting them in there. There's not a huge amount of weight in there. It's like 7 pounds of apples. However, it is thick, 7.5 pounds, but it is thick. So it might take a little bit extra time because of that. I'm back to using my old hose that came with my machine originally. They used to be big. This is the hose that came with my sister's, her brand new one. Unfortunately, when we put this hose on hers, it has a vacuum leak. We didn't think it was the hose, we thought maybe something else. So we did a complete cleaning of all the components of seals and checked all the fittings, everything was good. We took hers and put it on my machine using this hose, and it failed to achieve vacuum. We put the hose that was on here, my smaller hose that came with this, on hers, worked perfectly. We put this hose back on hers, failed to achieve vacuum. We took my vacuum pump with my hose, put it on hers, worked perfectly. Put it on mine, it worked perfectly. The commonality was this hose. So we're pretty sure that this hose has a problem. We may try another test of it and clean the O-ring and stuff like that, make sure that there's not something simpler. Anyway, right now we're using that. And you can see there's quite a difference between the old ones and the new ones. So we'll be back in about 2 days. Could be late tomorrow. We'll check to see what it is. And as soon as it's finished, we'll take them out, do the weight check, put them back in for 2 hours to make sure that they're dry. In the meantime, we'll get the twin of this batch going in my sister's machine. So we'll take things over to hers and get things started as soon as we can. It doesn't really have to be at the same time, but both machines are empty right now because I forgot about that. We'll see you right away. We're at my sister's new machine. Going to get the apple batch going like I did on mine. This is the setup we have so far on hers. She's kind of experimenting with things and trying things out. So she has the defrost fan in hers. Okay, and her defrost baffle is better and simpler than mine. I will be changing mine out. It's a piece of foam core with a couple of slots, fits right in there. Does a great job on directing the air on the in at the top, and then it comes out at the bottom. It does a great job. We get the thermometer underneath. It gives us some information of the barrel temperature as it's going through the cycles. Hey, it's showing that it's about 65 degrees in there, and that's about right. She doesn't have a disc yet, which we've already noticed a big difference on the amount of condensation on the front of the machine. And she doesn't have insulation around the seal. That was a real surprise. I'd forgotten how much water comes off of this during the process and after. So much so that she's got a little cutting board or flexible cutting mat underneath with paper towels to absorb all the water, because it's a lot. I was really surprised. I'd forgotten about it. Now, on hers, I see a gap in the seal right here. I can just pull it forward. Okay, now I see a little bit there. Now there's a complete ring all the way around. I'll close the drain valve right now. I don't need to customize it, and she's got her set the way she wanted to try it out. And it doesn't have the same custom function that the old one has. So you can customize it, but you're not really running it in that cycle. So we'll go ahead and start. And once it's cooled a bit, then we'll get the things on the tray. Right now she's trying out the vacuum pump up on a stand, so it's kind of hollow in here. So the air flow is not restricted by the pump, and the pump is out of the warm air stream. and then got a fan to blow more cool air coming up from the floor level, going past it to really pull that heat away from this area. And she also has a fan on the other side blowing into the inlet side of the machine. She's got this whole end of the table still for loading trays and bagging and things like that. So we'll see how that works. She got a really nice deal on this. This is a really nice cart. She got it at the Restore, it's a Habitat for Humanity Restore, $125 I think. And we added wheels to the bottom of it, and generally it's pretty nice. Has drawers and shelves and things. It should go pretty nice. And as soon as that's had 15 minutes to cool down, trust me, we'll be right on it in just 15 minutes. Ha! Anyway, as soon as that's had a chance to cool down a bit, we'll get the things in there. Her machine's been cooling for a while, so now let's get the food in. Got a piece of that corrugated plastic stuff to keep them away from her desktop and getting warm. And we'll get the first set of apples on there. So this is the 2,000 grams I brought over, so I can have the twin batch. I'm not going to worry about them being exactly even, but I will put them on the scale, and this is tray 1 is 1710, and I'm going to put a thermometer in that one. This is the one that's at the top of her machine, and it's definitely not quite as warm on the top shelf, which is interesting because all the heaters are the same. Okay, so that one's ready to go in. But I'm going to get all 4 of them ready before I open her machine and put them in. So 1715, try to get this tucked in there. So I want it setting on top of at least 1 piece of apple, and then a couple of pieces of apple over the top of it to shield it from the heat straight above, or from the heater pads that are above it. And I'd like to be able to see it. So let's prop that up. That should work. Hers doesn't have as much space in front to allow for the thermometer sticking out as much. Okay, there's the first 2. So same kind of thing. And these are the other part of the batch of apples from Chef's Store. Wow, that's a lot of ice. That can't stay. So I'm going to pull out some of that ice. That's ridiculous. I didn't realize there was so much in there. Cold, cold. I'm not putting that much ice in there. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever weighed. Break those apart a bit. This is the box of apples, the last of the box of apples that we bought months ago. And we should have taken care of them then instead of leaving them in the freezer for months. Now, we'll get a quick check on weight. 1485. Okay, now we're good enough. There's a buttload of ice. There's a lot of ice here. So the weights are going to be a little odd, but that's happens all the time. Tray 3 is the shelf in the machine that already has a temperature probe. So I'm going to not put it in this one until she buys another thermometer. Okay, and then we'll get a thermometer in this one. Going to kind of lay it on that apple slice and cover it with other apple slices. That should be good. So this has been going now for 46 minutes. It says it's 22 degrees now. The thermometer underneath is lower than 50 below. But I finally got the trays loaded, and we'll get them in there. And starting at the bottom with tray 4. The thermometers in the food show 10 degrees or lower right now. And I sure wish I had a disc to put in there. Okay, and on this, I still want to make sure I have the seal ring around there, and I do not have it everywhere. It's missing a spot right here. The advantage of not having the insulation that I have around mine is I can just pull the seal forward with my fingers. Now it's got a seal ring all the way around. We will, according to my sister, we will be insulating this because it drips water like crazy. And it is crazy to have it dripping water on your desk and support material and all that stuff when it's totally unnecessary. Plus, it's getting ridiculously cold here, which means we're transferring heat into it, which we're trying to get rid of by freezing. It doesn't make any sense to not insulate it. Of course, the insulation has to be flexible enough to allow it to be pulled in when it's under vacuum. Mine's been doing that for almost 5 years. Maybe it has been 5 years. And I do not think I put up with dripping water for more than an extremely short number of batches or small number of batches, because I just wouldn't do that. That's nuts. Anyway, continue. It's freezing, brr. Okay, so I think we'll be back when this one's closer to done. So now the race is on. Of course, mine has a head start, but the new ones are supposed to be quite a bit faster. I don't know. We'll find out. I know it'll have the freezing and then the vacuum freezing, which seemed to do a really nice job when we saw it on the last batch. I mean, it dropped the tray temperatures pretty quickly. But we had also had the setting on fast drying or something, one of the settings that we saw in there. Anyway, now it's on normal. So we'll come back when it's time and check it. In the meantime, I'll turn this fan on to cool the bottom of this. So if it starts while we're not standing here, it'll be cooling right away. With the fan blowing on it from the top side, which was what we had before, we never measured a temperature of above 125-ish. Otherwise, it was getting 140, 160. The thing was scorching. There's no reason to have it that hot. We'll be back when it's either done or closer to done or something interesting's happening. My sister's machine is going to finish in just about 3 minutes.
Thanks for making it through to here. I'm going to cut the video here and get the other half going just as quick as possible. I'll try to get the second half of the video up right away. Hopefully I can get them out back to back. So thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next half.
This is my sister's new freeze dryer. The functional test went off without a hitch. Everything was perfect. The freeze drying the bread went off without a hitch. Everything went fine. The first batch almost went perfect. It went perfect until she took out the food, checked it, make sure it was dry. One of the trays was not all the way dry. She put it back in for additional dry time, and it failed to achieve vacuum. She tried again. It failed to achieve vacuum. So then we defrosted the machine and started checking it. So we did a functional test again. It wouldn't achieve vacuum. Of course, one of the first things we checked was the seal. So we took the seal off, rinsed it real well, wiped everything down, all the edges of the metal, make sure everything was clean, put it all back together. Still failed to achieve vacuum. Checked the drain valve, drain hose, checked the vacuum hose, and at that point it was still failing to achieve vacuum. It would get down to the 3,000 to 4,000 millitorr range and then just wildly fluctuate hundreds of millitorr, sometimes a couple of thousand in a second. Obviously it was having some kind of vacuum issue. So we thought, well, maybe it's a vacuum pump issue, which seems really odd to happen that fast, but things can happen. Or maybe it was some other issue somewhere else in the machine. Again, it's a fairly complex piece. It has lots of areas that need to be airtight, completely airtight, or it's going to fail. Things happen. So to try to eliminate issues, we took her pump and her hose to my machine and switched them out. Tried her vacuum pump and hose on my machine, which I just finished doing a batch. It failed to achieve vacuum. It would only, on mine it doesn't tell you when it's still over 2,500. So all I know is that it couldn't go down to 2,500. And generally it gets down below 2,500 in 3 3/4 minutes. So basically, let's call it 4 minutes plus or minus a half a minute. So 3.5 to 4.5 minutes. Anyway, it failed to achieve vacuum. So we took my pump and my hose and put it on her machine. Worked like a charm. So at that point, we were pretty sure that the vacuum pump was the issue. We hadn't thought about changing the hose out, but I have a spare vacuum hose. I have my old large size vacuum hose. So we changed it out. We put my newer vacuum hose onto her machine. Worked perfectly first time. So anyway, so she's currently running with my vacuum hose on, and I'm using my old vacuum hose. And we'll do another test with this to make sure that this is the problem, but it seems like the vacuum hose was the problem. If we didn't have 5 years of experience, another freeze dryer, 2 more vacuum hoses, another vacuum pump, I'm not sure what we would have figured out or how we would have figured out that it was just the hose. Because everything looks perfect on it. You know, we checked the seals, it all looks perfect. I checked with a 10 power 10x loop to make sure at the magnifying level. I see nothing wrong with it. We will take the seals out later, the O-rings, and make sure that they're clean and then do another test. But a hose can be bad. It could have a bad crimp here. You could let small amounts of air in. I don't know what the problem is. I just know what didn't work and what did work. Interesting. So if you have a vacuum issue, it could be places that you didn't expect. I mean, that's literally, I did not expect it to be the hose. We were trying all the other components, never even thought of the hose until the last minute. We realized that we had changed all the components out except the hose. It looks like it was just a vacuum hose issue. We'll do some more testing on that later to confirm, though we've done it like 6 tries, and every time we've tried that hose after the initial break-in, it has failed. Every time we used a different vacuum pump or a different hose, everything was fine. So we're pretty sure that that was it. Doing some stuff with my sister's machine again. The hose that came with hers, when we first tested it and we tried 4 or 5 times, and then we moved the hose to my machine and moved it back to here and tried again, it's failed every time. So now I've taken the seals out and cleaned it and put it back together and see if that will make a difference. So she's been running her machine now with my hose on it. She's done a dozen batches, or almost a dozen batches now, and it's been doing the vacuuming perfectly. So I'm going to switch it out again and check this hose again to see if I can figure out if there was just a seal issue. So we're going to do the vacuum test part of it and not actually run a batch. Let's see what happens. Now I'm going to switch it out. Got that snug down. Get that closed. Let's see, up there. All right, test out the vacuum. And forgot to close the drain valve. So drain valve closed. And it's vacuuming down. 32, 25, 24.
At the time of editing this, my sister's machine has now been using her original hose again for 30 to 35 batches. I took the O-rings out and cleaned them, and cleaned the seat that the O-ring goes into, and then reassembled everything, and everything's been working fine. So I don't know what was in it. I don't know why it failed, because I couldn't see anything in the seat or on the seal. But apparently there was something on there, because now it's been working perfectly for batch after batch with no issue.